Some notes on the representational aspect of low-level semiosis.
Shift down the semiotic threshold. Hello everybody. In this short video, my colleague Ľudmila Lacková and me, my name is Faltýnek, we would like to present you a project we are currently working on. The project consists simply in asking one question. What is the semiotic threshold? The second question should be, what criteria should we consider when defining the semiotic threshold, or when we put it somewhere in communication or information behavior? And the last question is, how many thresholds are there? In ordinary language, threshold means some delimitation between two spaces. For example, door threshold separates a room from another room, or outdoor area from indoor area. On the other hand, semiotic threshold is a concept which semiotic uses to exclude some phenomena from its interest. Roughly speaking, semiotic threshold kick out physical phenomena ruled by physical laws out of the realm of semiosis, which is governed by cultural convention or some kind of representation. We would like to show you that some thresholds can be removed or shifted. We would like to make some housework in semiotic threshold or biosemiotic threshold, and we would like to manipulate with the thresholds in this short video.
The first step to do is to agree upon the question where the current semiotic threshold is situated. There is no general agreement on this topic, but I will mention some of the most important works on the semiotic threshold, and we will see that most of them are situated rather high. The aim of our project is to lower the threshold in order to let more biological processes enter the domain of semiotics. Let us start with the father of the modern semiotics, Umberto Eco. Probably it would be prudent to say that neurophysiological and genetic phenomena are not a matter for semioticians. The phenomena on the lower threshold should rather be isolated as indicating the point where semiotic phenomena arise from something non-semiotic, as a sort of missing link between the universe of signals and the universe of signs. For Eco, the lower semiotic threshold is clearly defined, and it is situated at some point between signals and signs. Signals should not, according to Eco, make part of the semiotic inquiry. As a consequence, no biological phenomena should be part of the semiotic project, neither at the genetic, epigenetic, cellular, nor neural level. This is, of course, in contradiction with most of biosemiotic ideas, and this is why in the field of biosemiotics, the semiotic threshold has already been lowered to some degree.
Now we would like to point out some cases in which the semiotic threshold was used to exclude certain phenomena from semiotics. First one is genetic code. As Eco says, this is something totally different from natural language. This could be some kind of S code in his terminology, but nothing like words or sentences as Jacobson believed. Second point is animal communication or communication of the rest of organisms like fungi or viruses. The nice example are parrots. Have you ever seen parrot name a new things by new words? It is happening sometimes, and this is nice example of semiotic activity. Next point, robots and AI I excluded also. It is reasonable for formal languages, but what about evolving symbolic systems in computer modeling? You should see works from Luke Steele's or Partanayoji. The last example is sign language. Do you know that Finland has sign language in constitution? Why? Because semiotics developed something which is called Hockett's language design features. By these features, animal communication was kicked out of the semiosis, also with the sign language, as it turned out later. Semiotics should be ashamed of this super theoretical semiotic threshold installation.
We can have more than just one semiotic threshold. Calabi could differentiate between primary and secondary thresholds. While the former is only a question of excluding non-semiotic from semiotic, the latter is a threshold inside the semiotic phenomena. Secondary thresholds delimit qualitatively different types of semiosis. Vegetative semiosis, which is related to the concept of recognition and based on iconic relations. Animal semiosis, related to association and based on indexical relations. And lastly, cultural semiosis, related to combination and based on symbolic relations. Kuhl speaks about secondary threshold zones being an elaboration of Eco's notion of a semiotic threshold. The indexical threshold zone is one that separates vegetative semiosis from animal semiosis. The indexical threshold zone lies in the capacity of association, which is lacking in the vegetative semiosis. The symbolic threshold zone separates animal semiosis from cultural semiosis and is related to the capacity of combination. All the biological phenomena under the first of the secondary thresholds is purely iconic. Most organisms are supplied with many functional cycles that enable vegetative relations. These are generally responsible for categorization and speciation, and for the simple forms of search, finding, selection, swarming, spreading, etc. Vegetative relations are just correspondences or relations of pure recognition only, however memory-based, because any semiosis assumes some sort of memory, which should mean that these are exclusively iconic. Then we have Marcello Barbieri, who distinguishes between two distinct types of semiosis in nature, one based on coding and the other one based on interpretation. The former is related to the beginning of life on Earth and the genetic code. The latter concerns only animals with neural system. Barbieri is convinced that the so-called Persian semiosis is only applicable to brain and neural system because this kind of semiosis requires an interpretation which is necessarily a mental phenomenon. Thus, it results in the theory of code biology, where there are two kinds of thresholds, one between life and non-life, and the other one between life with interpretation on one hand and life without interpretation on the other hand. This is a crucial problem for the discipline, and it already caused an important debate between the main proponents of the field. You remember the debate between Marcos and Barbieri, for instance. This problem, in fact, lies in the position of the semiotic threshold. Barbieri's definition of organic codes is triadic but is not Persian because it excludes interpretation. This is one of the options how to conserve triadicity but not include interpretation. Another possibility is to redefine interpretation or consider interpretant as a non-mental component of semiosis. We would like to go in the direction of the second option. While we agree with Barbieri on the exclusion of the mental phenomena from the semiotic descriptions of lower organisms, we are convinced that this does not necessarily mean excluding also the notion of interpretant. We stress the difference between the notions of interpretation and interpretant. For Peirce, interpretation is not necessarily mental. Therefore, interpretant is not exclusively related to cognitive phenomena or mind. Rather, Peirce uses the notion of quasi-mind. If there is semiosis, there has to be interpretant, but we can comprehend interpretant as something mind-independent. We can comprehend it at a very basic level as categorization or decision-making. We would like to mention that exclusion of interpretation and interpreter from the description of the sign of the living does not mean that we do not assume the use of the sign by an individual. In biosemiotics, we find many approaches undermining the interpretative nature of the living. For instance, in the hermeneutical conception of life by Anton Marcos, or Alexei Sharov with Tomi Vekavara express the role of an individual in their concept of agency. The characterization of the living as agency or interpretation is unquestionable.
At the level of protosemiosis, we can talk about relational representation. We lower the threshold to the elementary representational relations between a sign and its object. The main criteria for us is the von Neumann's probe. A subject like von Neumann's probe is evolutionary. We can talk about the historicity of this representative system. We can complete this criteria with the aforementioned criteria of agency and interpretant. If there is evolution of a subject in terms of representation of his system, we can state that this phenomena is behind the semiotic threshold. The advantage of our approach is that we are not pushed to kick out things like sign language or animal communication out of the scopes of semiotics.